Hello and welcome to all the vampires and ghouls out there. I'm Joe, here with me is my co-host Dan.
Hello and greetings.
And as you can tell from the title, we were not terribly impressed. Now, to start with, when it comes to this film, when I first saw it, I thought, oh, this is such a great film. And when I first saw it, it was a number of years ago. I forget when. The second time I saw it, I remember still thinking this is a great classic, even though I had just read the novel for the how many of time. And I was like, well, it's inaccurate, but it's still good. But then I saw it again and I went, well, yeah, it's great. I mean, come on, it leads into the rest of the Universal Monsters universe, which is such a great universe. I love the Universal Monster films. But I've not seen all of them. But those I have seen, I've generally loved. This one on this watch through, evidently I was on some pretty hard stuff when I was watching it before. I'm joking there, actually, no. But the point is, I was a little more merciful towards this film. Now that I've been on YouTube playing the book and movie critic for 2 years, I'm not as merciful. I'm not as nice a person, I guess. I'm not as forgiving. And this film does not deserve forgiving. Because, and this is probably going to cost us some people, but let's be honest, we're not trying to be merciful here because as critics, we do have to be as harsh and sharp and bitter to an extent as, say, Roger Ebert and Gene Siskel, who set a high standard as movie critics. And as far as horror movies go, with horror being a genre that's very close to my heart, and I think yours as well, one of my favorite genres. But this movie begins well. Oh my gosh, the sets, the acting, the extras are perfect. They cram a lot of the castle scenes, almost a third of the novel, into just like 10-minute scenes. Well, or 10 minutes of the movie. Which is almost horrifying, but that I'm willing to forgive. It's like, okay, well, you have to an extent. You're trying to get the ball rolling. Then you get the boat scenes where this is quite superfluous. Not entirely, but quite. Now, when this movie harkens back to the previous generation of films, the silent film generation, it's awesome early in the film. But then, as the movie progresses, it moves steadily away from the silent generation of films and into garbage realm. It then becomes a dumpster fire. But the trouble is, when Dracula arrives in London, the atmosphere is still pretty good. We're going to be honest. But with the flower girl thing, because, and this is the main problem here, because this is a scene derived from a very particular scene in the novel, it loses all impact. And loses all right to even be in the film because of that. And then you got the introduction of Dracula in the opera house to some of the characters. I don't know why. That's not in the novel. Should not be in the film. It's just the director wanting to have as many Bela Lugosi scenes as possible. And the problem with that is that, for one thing, Mel Brooks actually spoofs this scene and does this scene far better. And for another, the reality is that with Dracula, now Bela Lugosi was very charming and charismatic, but with Dracula kind of eating up the scene here and having an interesting of sorts interaction with Lucy, the problem is that it removes from another factor, and that's that basically Arthur is supposed to be with Lucy. but Arthur's not in the film. Neither is Quincy for that matter, but I'll get to that in a minute. And Jonathan just hanging back as Dracula also flirts with his girl as well. Well, yeah. Then we get to Lucy getting drained and dying. And then we get to the Mina arc where she's bitten, but Mina then spends the next scene flirting with Drac and trying to grab his attention as much as possible, which makes no sense. And then later she sneaks out to meet up with Drac, which makes no sense, while the men are debating how Dracula's been proven to be the vampire, but Harker's is too stupid to even realize it. Meanwhile, in other news, this depiction of Harker also needs help getting spoon to mouth, because he has a tendency to just flip the food back at the person or just otherwise forget what a spoon is.
Well, I suppose there's a reason why they essentially live at a sanatorium.
Yeah. You've got that, along with the fact that Renfield just leaves his cell when he was escorted back to his cell by an orderly, just the scene before that. So that was confusing. I mean, he can move through walls or teleport. That's a problem. Either that or the guy didn't lock the freaking cell door. It makes no sense. And then you have the Lucy arc that pops up for a bit, which... where the heck did that come from?
You've removed Lucy from the movie.
Well, they just mixed up the story arcs. And it makes no sense.
Good Lord.
Then we get to the final confrontation, but not before we see that Mina's a total weakling who will break down crying at the slightest problem without the core of strength that she has in the novel. And if I'm harping on and on about the novel, it's because it's one of my favorite novels of all time. Honestly, it is more a romance action story than a horror. And it is still a horror, though. But the horror elements take second place to action and romance. And what's more is... okay, first off, we gotta give compliments to Van Helsing. His actor does a perfect job in the role. Same with Bela Lugosi. They're perfectly cast. The problem is, you have details like Mina being the daughter of Seward. That makes no sense. When Seward's supposed to be her age. You've also got the problem that the younger generation of heroes have all been removed. Or otherwise, and here's the problem, deconstructed. Jonathan Harker in the novel is a badass. He is just indomitable. He is the one who goes to the castle, presents the deeds to Carfax Abbey and other locations to Dracula, gets locked up, gets tormented for weeks on end, psychologically tortured, and witnesses horrors that are unimaginable, and yet he scales up and down the wall, has the guts to jump almost out to sea, crosses Transylvania towards, well, Western Europe, and later in the novel, when Dracula's kind of left his mark on Mina and is slowly torturing her psychologically and spiritually, trying to transform her into a vampire, which is apparently slightly more difficult thematically because she's a much purer character than Lucy. Harker is often seen with a knife in hand, or a kukri, I think it's called. And he ends up being someone who charges Dracula personally, blade in hand, threatening Dracula, so that with such madness that Dracula gets scared and flees because Dracula's going, wow, this guy's scary. I don't want to mess with him. He's not the same guy I used to dominate. And Jonathan then all but leads the team all but him and really Arthur and Quincy join forces and whatnot and plan it out perfectly, but along with Mina, but I'll get to that in a minute. And it is him and Quincy who put an end to Dracula. Just as the sun is going down. And they battle with gypsies, and Jonathan's honestly the most ferocious of the fighters in some ways, and the most impulsive, with Quincy and the others having to cover for him because he's such a hothead, because Dracula dared to threaten his wife. And Jonathan... Okay. Jonathan is someone whom I would cast an actor like Tom Cruise in the role of. Or Christian Bale, because he's supposed to have an English accent. He's from London, after all. Or at least England. And Christian Bale would be perfect casting in this role. But so long as he takes up, well, the kind of body shape that he had as Batman. Jonathan is a beast. He is both warrior and lover archetype rolled into one awesome package. And then you got Mina. Wilhelmina is honestly, like, Mina Harker is just one of the greatest female leads in any novel that's ever been written. She is tough, fierce. She wants to get that vampire more than some of the boys do. She is devoted and dedicated and loving towards Jonathan. And she assumes the role of mother of the group. She is, honestly, in some ways, the inspiration, I would argue, for characters like Jean Grey. She is much more of a powerful female icon than Wonder Woman, overcoming a great many more challenges in some ways than on a spiritual and thematic level than Wonder Woman ever has had to deal with in DC Comics. But that's also due to the writers having never really been interested in Diana. But Mina, like, she receives the mark of Dracula. She's violated, physically threatened by him, and yet she continues to defy him. They use hypnosis and she volunteers in order for her to spy on Dracula, which is incredibly dangerous for her on a spiritual level. And she has no fear of going into the dangerous Transylvanian countryside with nary a thought to herself or her own safety. And you turn that into a sobbing crybaby who would cheat on her husband just with some random guy because he has a title. Here's the problem. The original idea of Dracula is that the vampire preying on the women is a form of violation, and the female vampire preying on children is violation. This is basically a euphemism and metaphor for, basically a certain word that starts with A and ends with T. That's what a vampire is a metaphor for. The idea is that it's a sensual, of sorts, violation. Here, Mina's a willing participant, as is Lucy. That completely undermines the concept. And it also turns Jonathan into something of a cuckold. And the problem with that is that he was not. And and by removing, say, Quincy from the equation, you are removing the kind of Tom Cruise, Brendan Fraser type character from the mix. And he's very important. Arthur also serves in that capacity. Seward serves as a apprentice magician archetype of sorts to the fully trained magician archetype that is Van Helsing. Van Helsing was never the male lead, never the action star. He was always the Obi-Wan. So what if we just remove Luke Skywalker from Star Wars and just have the original trilogy focus on Obi-Wan? It would make no sense, thematically or story-wise.
What really gets to me is that people criticize Dracula Dead and loving it. But
For spoofing this movie.
But the fact that we have scenes that are done the exact same way, all the characters speak with the exact same tone and everything, except you have Leslie Nielsen and Mel Brooks, and it somehow becomes funny. They don't change the tone of their voices.
But the thing is, they do add some dialogue, but on the other hand, yeah, they're imitating the accents of Bela and the Van Helsing actor. But the problem is, Mel Brooks pokes fun at this film. Now, this film came out in 1931, and it's supposed to be untouchable. And as a film, you're likely, it should have gotten a speeding ticket for how fast it goes through scenes from the novel and story arcs from the novel. Now, removing the novel from the equation, the speeding ticket should still be applied as this thing speeds through its plot lines, well, faster than, I don't know, the Flash speeds through time. The problem is also that you don't get to know the heroes. Because Jonathan Harker is not introduced in the first 5 minutes, you never get attached to him. And because they give him all the idiot lines, it turns him into a bumbling idiot who you really want to see dead. You don't care for him. You don't even like him. Mina, being given idiot lines, does not help her either. And the kind of overacting on the melodramatic side does not help either. And this movie is frustrating. The Wolfman films I dearly love because I love just how, like, the emotional draw of the Wolfman and the drama and whatnot. I also love the transformation sequence from the original movies. Hollywood has almost never been able to properly copy it and whatnot. But arguably, they had one of the perfect actors to play Dracula. I say one of them because I would argue Christopher Lee and the one actor from Van Helsing from 2004, I think, were also pretty perfect casting for the role. But Bela was just as good, in some ways a little better, casting. He's charismatic. His eyes, oh my gosh, he does great stuff with his eyes and his eyebrows. His eyes in every role he plays, he conveys a lot, whether it's positive or negative traits of the character. And he is a great actor. The Van Helsing actor does much the same. He is a great actor. You've got great casting. You just need to fix the script. But the problem is this film is so focused on deconstructing Harker and Mina, it falls flat. And it forgets what the heart and the core of the story is. Jonathan and Mina are aspirational characters. You should be able to aspire to be like them. All I aspire to is just to see them dead. So this movie is not a good film. It's a deconstruction of an almost perfect novel. So, yeah, this is not a good adaptation. As a film on its own, it's a rushed mess. Thankfully, the next Universal story, both one that involves a vampire and one that doesn't, would end up better. So, let's rate this film. How are you going to rate it, Dan?
Half a star. The acting cast, I don't have any complaints over the actors. Like Bela Lugosi is...
Clearly, he's made for the role. I'm going to say 1 star. The first 25 minutes or so.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
The first 20 minutes are really good. They crammed a lot of scenes together, but the atmosphere, the music, that violin is perfect.
Indeed.
And the casting and the direction during that part of the film is pretty good. Just get this director a speeding ticket. Get him...
And in front of a judge and probably the eye doctor.
Why a judge and an eye doctor?
The judge dealing with the speeding tickets.
Mm-hmm.
and the eye doctor because he's got everything cross the story's a mess.
Oh, he got everything mixed up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And probably an expert on dyslexia.
Yeah. Because it's like it's like a dyslexic is putting this movie together. Yeah. Now, this is not going to make us any fans in some cases, but I have to be honest about this film. I don't want to lie to people. I don't think this is my favorite Universal movie. Like I said, in my younger days, I liked it a lot more, but now I'm going, I don't know what I was thinking. I do not like this film. But on the other hand, the set that you see, like the way the set is organized for Dracula's castle is the same way that the Kevin Sorbo Hercules Legendary Journeys Vlad episode would set up the castle. In that regard, it's remarkably well done how they paid homage to this film. Every Dracula film after this would pay homage to this film. In some cases, I feel this is appropriate, but in others, maybe they should pay less homage to this and just adapt the darn novel. So, if you enjoyed this review, and even if you didn't, don't forget to smash that like and that subscribe button as though you were Jonathan taking out Dracula.